Last concept for this chapter is 40.4. It's all about bioenergetics. It says energy requirements are related to animal size, activity, and environment. Bioenergetics is basically the study of the overall flow and transformation of energy in an animal. So if you wanted to study how an animal gets energy in the form of food and, say, thermal energy from the environment, and how that energy passes through the creature, and all the various numbers that go along with the energy flowing in and out of the creature to its environment, from its environment, that would be the study of bioenergetics. It determines how much food an animal needs, and it's related to the animal's size and activity and environment. All of those are factors in figuring out the amount of energy that a creature needs to survive and thrive in its stated environment. As we've already studied, animals harvest chemical energy from food. Creatures like you and I have to engulf food from some other source to get that energy. Energy containing molecules from food are usually used to make ATP, which again we've already studied. Adenosine triphosphate, which powers the cellular work inside the cell. After the needs of staying alive are met, you have to have a baseline of energy necessary just to survive. Any remaining food molecules can then be used for growth or repair, something we would call biosynthesis. So that would be getting larger, getting stronger, fixing things that have gone wrong, maybe repairing a cut or rebuilding muscle or bone, also putting energy into storage such as fat, production of gametes for sexual reproduction, things like that. So step one is to stay alive and survive. Step two then is to get bigger, larger, stronger, pass on your genes, that type of thing. So here's an overview of the bioenergetics of a particular creature. Of course, you have energy coming in the form of food, organic molecules in the form of food, and then some of that energy is lost in various ways. You have energy lost through heat, you have energy lost through waste products, you have energy lost through the process of respiration, and you see in a number of places we have heat loss or energy loss for the formation of heat, but then you see how energy is used and transformed throughout the body. So you have creation of new body cells, you have the creation of materials that go on to build the body, keep it alive, and things of that nature. So this is kind of a quick chart that kind of shows you some of the energy flow in and out of a living creature. If we want to try to put some numbers to the bioenergetics of any living creature, we would probably talk about the metabolic rate. The metabolic rate is the amount of energy an animal uses in a particular unit of time. So we might be talking about the amount of energy a creature uses every hour or every minute or every day. And the metabolic rate can be determined by an animal's heat loss, which is a form of energy that is basically lost on a continual basis, and the amount of oxygen consumed or carbon dioxide produced. So that would be kind of a way of measuring how much energy is going in, how much energy is coming out, and how much energy the creature is using in any particular piece of time. So here you have an example of a scientist watching this shark, and they are taking measurements of, they have water flowing from left to the right of the picture, and the shark is swimming against that current, and they're trying to measure the rate of oxygen consumption of that shark to try to determine his metabolic rate. How efficiently does he use the energy that his body takes in and then stores and uses for different purposes. When we talk about the metabolic rate, we kind of define it in a couple different ways. One of those is called BMR, or basal metabolic rate. The basal metabolic rate is kind of like your baseline, your resting rate. That's the metabolic rate of an endotherm at rest or at a comfortable temperature. So if you're sitting on the couch in a 70-degree room and you're watching American Idol, you could then measure your basal metabolic rate. You're not exercising, you're not running up and down a basketball court, you're not doing anything like taking a biology exam or anything taxing like that. You're simply in a resting, comfortable environment. How much energy does your body burn? In that case, that would be the basal metabolic rate. Then we also have something called the standard metabolic rate. The standard metabolic rate is the rate of an ectotherm at rest at a specific temperature. So remember, an ectotherm relies on the outside temperature much more than you do to control what's going on inside. So if we're going to look at an ectotherm, we're going to look at what's called standard metabolic rate, and that's going to be at a specific temperature. So we might be looking at, say, turtles at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or we might be looking at crocodiles at 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and that would be the standard metabolic rate. That way we can compare between animals' ectotherms if we hold them at the same temperature. Both rates assume a non-growing, fasting and non-stressed animal. So you're not talking about a creature that's say going through puberty or going through a big growth spurt. You're not talking about a creature who is not getting enough to eat or is stressed out. You're talking about a happy, content creature in a nice environment. Ectotherms have much lower metabolic rates than endotherms of comparable size. So if you were to compare, say, an alligator, which is a pretty large creature, to a goat. Say you have an alligator and a goat, or an alligator and a horse, two creatures that might be of comparable weight and size, you're going to find the alligator has a much lower metabolic rate than the endotherm does. Of course, there's lots of factors that affect the metabolic rate, including environmental conditions and things of that nature. But even if you have a creature that's at a resting, comfortable environment, there are internal things that affect him as well. And primarily that's going to be size and activity. So if we were to compare the metabolic rate of these two creatures, and they were both happy in a nice, safe, good environment for them, well, the metabolic rate of these two creatures would be very different simply based on size alone. But size and activity has something to do with your basal metabolic rate. The metabolic rate is proportional to the body mass to the power of 3/4. And what that means is that smaller animals tend to have a higher metabolic rate per gram than larger animals. So if you compared, say, the mouse and the elephant in the previous slide there, you compared the metabolic rate per gram of the mouse to the metabolic rate per gram of the elephant, and you're going to find that the mouse has a much higher rate per weight, rate per gram. The higher metabolic rate of the smaller animal leads to higher oxygen delivery rate, breathing faster, faster heart rate, greater relative blood flow and volume compared with the larger animal. So basically these little creatures, they run at a higher speed, metabolically speaking, than a large creature like an elephant. Now if you can compare these creatures just based on size alone, you'll get sort of a nice straight line. Obviously as the size grows up, the basic basal metabolic rate or amount of oxygen used per hour goes up. So obviously an elephant is going to use a lot more oxygen per hour than a mouse, and so you see this nice straight line. But then if you do that per kilogram of body mass, if you look at it as a ratio of basal metabolic rate per mass, what you see is that the small creatures have a very high ratio, and then it drops as you get larger and larger. So yes, in total an elephant has a much higher BMR, but if you look at that as a ratio to his size, the elephant's BMR is quite a bit lower, and so you see it drops quite a bit as you get to larger and larger creatures if you're looking at that relative to the body mass or size of the creature. Based on your own life experiences, you probably know that activity greatly affects metabolic rate for both endotherms and ectotherms. If you are working hard and exercising, or let's say this summer you go to the beach and you're playing volleyball and swimming, you know within a couple hours you're going to be starving. You're going to be ready for lunch maybe earlier than usual, or you're going to eat more at lunch than usual. That's because your increased activity has increased your need for energy. So in general, the maximum metabolic rate an animal can sustain is inversely related to the duration of the activity, which basically means the harder you're having to work, the less you can keep that up. If you're having to run, say, at a full sprint for some reason, you're not going to be able to travel as far and do that for as long as if you're going at a slow jog, and that just makes pretty good basic sense. For most terrestrial animals, the average daily rate of energy consumption is 2 to 4 times their BMR. So for most living creatures going about their regular daily lives, searching for food, escaping predators, finding a place to live, trying to find a mate, they're going to expend somewhere between 2 and 4 times their BMR. Remember, BMR is like if they're just resting, chilled out, not doing anything. So 2 to 4 times that BMR resting state. Humans in developed countries like, say, the United States, France, England, we only expend about 1.5 times BMR. So that's kind of a measure of our sedentary lifestyles. Most of us sit in an office, we don't exercise much, we drive from place to place in a car, we get home, sit down and watch TV. We don't expend a lot of energy in our regular daily lives, certainly not as much as your standard wild animal does. If we wanted to see how much energy you used in an entire day, like if we wanted to track the energy that you used in an entire day, where exactly that energy went, what the activities that energy went to, we would call that your energy budget. Different species of animals use energy and materials in different ways because they kind of have, they place different importance on different activities depending on their environment, depending on the species. So the use of energy is kind of partitioned or can be divided into these various activities. So some of that energy is going to go to BMR, which is just your basic baseline rate. That's just keeping you alive, keeping your heart beating, keeping your lungs breathing air in and out. So some of the energy that you take in is going to go toward that. Some of your energy is going to go toward activity, walking, running, playing sports, taking notes, whatever it is you might be doing. Some of your energy is going to go toward thermoregulation, keeping your body temperature stable and steady. If you're talking about humans, that's about 98.6 degrees. Some of that energy is going to go to growth and repair of the body itself, and then some of that energy would go toward reproduction. So depending on the creature, you can kind of divide this energy up in a couple of different ways. So you can look at kind of a pie chart for the energy budget for these 4 animals. You have a female human from a temperate climate, you have a male Adelie penguin from Antarctica who is brooding or keeping watch over an egg, you have a tiny little female deer mouse from temperate North America, and then you have a female eastern indigo snake. And all of these 3 are endotherms. This one happens to be an ectotherm. But you can look at the pie chart is slightly different for the various creatures. Like for example, in this creature here, there's a large section that is not necessarily present in the others. This large kind of tan section is thermoregulation. So notice that thermoregulation is a small part of the human and a smaller part of the Adelie penguin, but it seems to be a very large portion of the deer mouse, and it seems to be non-existent in the snake, because remember the snake is an ectotherm and it kind of uses for the most part the environment to control its internal temperature. You'll notice a few other things in here, like for example the human is undergoing some amounts of growth, and these 2 creatures don't seem to be undergoing a lot of growth, whereas the snake seems to be undergoing more. So you have a couple of different ways of dividing up the energy uses, the energy budget for the creature, and it kind of depends on the environment, kind of depends on the creature you're talking about. All these are endotherms here, and this would be one of the ectotherms that we're looking at. So you can also see the annual energy expenditure. So you can see the total kilocalories per year for the human, the penguin, and the little mouse, and compared to the snake as well. The very last thing we want to talk about are a couple of examples of changes that can occur within certain animals depending on the environment. And you have probably heard of or read about, like for example, bears going into hibernation. Hibernation is a great example of bears changing their physiology to get through a particular environmental condition. There's a couple of others that are similar to hibernation. One of them is called torpor, and the other one is called estivation. So we're going to talk briefly about these particular cases where creatures do something to conserve energy because of environmental conditions. So despite the various adaptations that creatures have, particularly endotherms, to maintain homeostasis, sometimes environmental change is just too great, or the extremes of the environment are just too great to overcome, so creatures might go into one of these states. The first one is called torpor. Torpor is a short-term physiological state which activity is low, metabolism decreases. You can almost think of it as a miniature hibernation, but the difference is that torpor tends to be very short-term, and creatures are more easily awakened from torpor. Torpor enables animals to save energy while avoiding difficult or dangerous conditions. So a lot of small creatures like hummingbirds and squirrels and small mice will undergo torpor. When they undergo torpor, it may be for only minutes at a time or perhaps an hour at a time, but it's almost like a very deep sleep. But within that sleep, more so than when you go to sleep, they lower their body temperature, they lower their metabolism, and they are conserving energy during that time. The other one is called hibernation. That is more of a long-term torpor. It's an adaptation usually to cold winter conditions, lack of food, and that type of thing. Bears and other creatures will fatten themselves up in the spring and the summer, and then they will undergo hibernation. It's more than just sleep. They lower their body temperature, they lower their metabolic rate, they may only wake up 2 or 3 times during the entire winter months to use the bathroom, maybe get a drink of water, maybe eat some small amount of food that they stored in there with them. But for the most part, they are just a couple of steps above dead. Their body temperature is very low, their heartbeat and heart and breathing rate are very low, and they are doing more than just sleeping. They have very much lowered their metabolic rate. Finally, this can also occur during the summer. Summer torpor is called estivation, and some creatures that live in desert conditions or very hot conditions, they will go into this torpor during the summer, just like a lot of creatures will do so during other times of the year. It's almost like summer hibernation in a way. So if the creature needs to survive a long period of high temperatures and scarce water conditions, they might go into what's called estivation. And for small creatures, daily torpor is sometimes exhibited on a regular basis. So this little squirrel here who's undergoing torpor is more than just asleep. In many cases, if you found one of these little creatures in the midst of torpor, you could go and touch them and pick them up, and they might not even awaken immediately. They are so deeply slowed down, and if you were to look at them, it might take a while. It might be a minute or two before you would see him take a breath, or if you were to measure his heartbeat, it would be extremely slow. So this is an example of conserving energy through changing behavior based on the environment. So this whole chapter is focused on the whole organism and maintaining homeostasis and how creatures use energy based on their environment, based on their body size, and the various conditions of their internal anatomy. Future chapters are going to focus on specific systems, so we're going to look at, say, the respiratory system, the endocrine system, the digestive system. We won't take a lot of time because this is not anatomy and physiology and we don't have the entire semester. So we're going to look at the summaries, take a look at the chapter summaries, take a look at the outline that I put in the chapter folder, take a look at the crash course videos, concentrate on that. Don't so much concentrate on reading the chapter word for word because we just won't have the time to go into a lot of detail. So next up, some specific systems that enable animals to meet the basic challenges of life, and we'll go on from there. If you have any questions, let me know. Reach me online or email me. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.